Bismillah. Please recite Surah Fatiha for Marhoom Mujtaba Hussain Mirza ibn Ashiq Mirza. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين أبي القاسم محمد وأهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. أما بعد فقد قال الله تبارك وتعالى وقوله الحق وهو أصدق القائلين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الله الذي خلقكم من ضعف ثم جعل من بعد ضعف قوة ثم جعل من بعد قوة ضعفا وشيبة يخلق ما يشاء وهو العليم القدير صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوات Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So, we are gathered to commemorate, or rather pay our tribute to this Marhoom with the Majlis of Eisal-e-Sawab. And as always, make the dua in the bargah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that inshallah with the thawab and the reward of this gathering and the reward of this Majlis, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala elevate the rank and the status of the marhoom in the hereafter, and also at the same time give the bereaved family patience to go through these difficult times. The verse that I recited is from Surah Rum, verse number 54, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about a very important phenomena. And that phenomena is something which we see on our daily lives, our daily basis. He starts out by saying, Allahul ladhi, God is the one who created you min za'fin, from weakness. Thumma ja'ala min ba'di za'fin quwwatan. After having created you in weakness, He provided you with quwwah, with power. And then it says, Thumma ja'ala min ba'di quwwatin za'fan. And He placed for you, after having given you the power, He again gave you the weakness. Wa shaybatan. Weakness, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses the word shaybatan, that is equal to the old age. And then He says, yakhluqu ma yasha. Allah creates whatever He wishes. Wa huwa al-alimul qadir. And indeed, He's all knowledgeable and He's all powerful. As I mentioned, that the three steps that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioning in this verse is obviously reflecting towards weakness, which is the time of the birth of insan, the mankind. Because at that time, you are totally dependent on those people who are taking care of you. And that is the ultimate weakness for insan, for mankind. You cannot survive a minute or a day or an hour without any support, without any care, without any guardianship. You have to have someone. Either it's in the form of your parents, if they're not around, if it's in the form of someone else, in the family, whoever it might be, but someone has to take care of you because you are weak at that time. And that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, that we created you in weakness. You were helpless. You could not have survived on your own, and that is a fact. The second stage that Allah says, we powered you, we gave you power after having created you in weakness. This is the time of your youth. This is the time of your adolescence. This is the time when you are able to go by yourself. You do not really require anyone else's assistance. You're able to live your life. And this is the reason we see even in our own cultures and even in our own societies, we have a date, or we rather have a year when we consider these people or these kids to be adults, and they're on their own at the moment. As far as the laws are concerned, now they can decide for themselves, and so on and so forth. So this is the period where Allah says, we gave you power. You were weak, now you have this power. And then He says, ثُمَّ بَعْدَ, and then ثُمَّ جَعَلَ مِن بَعْدِ قُوَّةٍ ضَعْفًا. But once again, after having given you this power, once again we're going to inflict you with weakness. And that is the old age. And you see, insan starts to frail, the body starts to frail, the old age gets over this mankind, this insan, and eventually this person dies. And they end up in the grave. So they started in the form of weakness. They continued with some power that God had given to them. And then eventually they all end up in the same format, being weak once again. This is the phenomena that we see in our daily lives on daily basis every day. A newborn comes into this life. We see how we take care of it. And then the same way, a person who's leaving sort of becomes like a newborn who's totally dependent on the people who are in the surroundings. And that's why we see that this is indeed a great ibadat, great worship, to be able to take care of those who are elders in your house, to be able to take care of those who are your parents, to be able to take care of them while they're advanced in age, because this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala considers to be an ibadat. He talks about in Surah Bani Israel chapter 17 when He says, وَقَضَى رَبُّكَ أَنْ لَا تَعْبُدُوا إِلَّا إِيَّاهُ وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. This part you have heard many times, but it continues towards the end. The ayah says, but when the time that one of them or both of them become advanced in age, فَلَا تَنْهَرْهُمَا وَلَا تَقُلْ لَهُمَا أُفٍّ. This is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses us. He said, yes, I'm addressing you, I'm telling you, I'm commanding you that do not worship anyone except me, and be kind towards your parents. Everybody's kind towards their parents, inshallah. But the part that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to draw our attention towards, He says, فَلَا تَقُلْ لَهُمَا أُفٍّ وَلَا تَنْهَرْهُمَا بَلْ قُلْ لَهُمَا قَوْلًا كَرِيمًا. Do not shun them away. Do not treat them or do not disrespect them. Do not even use the word uff out of discontent or out of being discomforted by them. Rather, قُلْ لَهُمَا قَوْلًا كَرِيمًا. You speak to them nicely. Speak to them with gentleness. You speak to them with kindness, utmost respect. And this is the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to you. So those who have this ability or those who are given this opportunity to go ahead and take care of their parents when they're advanced in age, in reality Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving them an opportunity not to just earn thawab. Yes, there are a lot of thawab and rewards for that, but also to be able to perform another ibadat on top of other ibadat that they're performing. Salawat Biji Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And that's why we see God says, كَيْفَ تَكْفُرُونَ بِاللَّهِ وَكُنْتُمْ أَمْوَاتًا فَأَحْيَاكُمْ. That how do you deny Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? You were dead. You did not exist. فَأَحْيَاكُمْ. And we brought you to life. ثُمَّ يُمِيتُكُمْ ثُمَّ يُحْيِيكُمْ ثُمَّ إِلَيْهِ تُرْجَعُونَ. 4 things that Allah is discussing here. 2 deaths and 2 lives. He said, you did not exist. That is equal to death. We brought you to life, يُحْيِيكُمْ. And then we caused you to die again. And that is the death that comes to every single person living. And then we will bring you back to life again and we will raise you towards us. So the same concept is being discussed over here. I don't have time to go into the details of it. Some of the reasons and the wisdom behind this death that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given to us. A lot of time we start asking questions as to what is the purpose of this death. In fact, if you look into the hadith and the quotations of Masumeen, narrations of Masumeen, they have actually given the answer to all of these questions. A person came to our 6th Imam, Imam Ja'far Sadiq alayhi salatu wa salam, asking in regards to what is the purpose behind death and what do we get out of it. So he replied by saying, إِنَّ قَوْمًا أَتَوْا نَبِيًّا فَقَالُوا. A group of people came to their prophet or the prophet of their time and they asked him, عُدُوا لَنَا رَبَّكَ يَرْفَعْ عَنَّا الْمَوْتِ. Ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to remove death from our community, from our society, from our people. And after hearing that, فَدَعَى لَهُمْ فَيَرْفَعُ اللَّهُ. The prophet made the dua and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lifted death from those people. So nobody was dying in that community. After a while, they started seeing the increment in their numbers. Their houses started getting smaller. The people started increasing. Nobody was dying. People were busy taking care of their own parents, not only just their own parents, but their grandparents and then their great-grandparents. A man would have to feed his own father, his own mother, his grandfather, his grandmother, everyone. And this was something which had occupied them so much so that they were unable to even earn livelihood. And then some people were running after livelihood so much because their expenses were increasing and they had to be able to run the affairs of the house. Right away, the same people came to Rasul of their time and said, no, ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bring the death back to us. Because of that death, we were able to survive in a normal way. This life has become abnormal without anyone dying, without anyone leaving. So in other words, we see what Imam is trying to tell us over here, that this death is also in a way a favor and a ni'mat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that is given to us. Do not look at this death to be something which is inflicting this family and it is a matter of something which they suffer or turmoil or trouble for them. No, rather this is actually, in that respect, yes, they have lost a loved one, that is really right, that is really the gist of it. But at the same time, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because of this function that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created, He's actually doing us a favor, because if that was not the case, we will also run into the same exact situation that the society was in. Salawat Beji Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. This is where our first Imam also gives a nasihat to his son. Amir al-Mu'mineen is giving nasihat to his son, Imam Hassan Mujtaba alayhi salatu wasalam, by when he says, don't have time to read the Arabic, so I'll just explain, or the translation of it. He says, my son, know that you have been created for the next world and not for this world. You've been created for annihilation and not to stay, for death and not for life. This life is a transient place, a place which is a path to the hereafter. You're driving away from death. If you are driving away from death, which no one can run away from it, which none of its seekers can miss, it has to be experienced by every single person. So beware lest it catches you at a time while you are in the state of disobedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Lest it comes to you while you're disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Lest it befalls you while you're in a bad state, a state which you wouldn't want to be in. Lest this death comes upon you at that particular time. So first Imam says, let it be known that it will come upon you. You cannot run away from it. While you can run away from it, at least you could do is be in the state where you're in the state of obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when this death approaches you. Because if you were in the state of disobedience, then just letting you know that what will be the outcome of this death. And again, the same Imam was asked, our second Imam was asked, as to why are we so fearful of this death? You see that insan hardly makes the dua that, oh Allah, bring death upon me. Although you're not encouraged to make such dua. Because if you can utilize this life for your betterment for the hereafter, then this life is also a ni'mat and a favor to you by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But usually is not the case for us. So Imam was asked as to why are we afraid? Why are we fearful of this death? Imam replied by saying, لما قال رجل له ما بالنا نكره الموت ونحب ولا نحبه. Why do we dislike نكره? Why do we have this dislike for this death? Why do we not love it? Imam said لأنكم أخربتم الآخرة. Because you have wrecked, you have destroyed your hereafter. وأمرتم الدنياكم. And you have established and you have constructed this world for you. Imam says, you hate to move from a constructed place to a place which is demolished. It's simple as that. If someone was to ask you that you're living in a nice house, mashallah, that for a time being, can you move to this, demolished, wretched place so you can live there for a while? I said, no, why would I do so? I already have this house. Imam is telling us the same exact thing. The reason we are afraid of this death is because we have constructed this world for us, and on the other hand, we have wrecked our akhirah. The akhirah has been destroyed and demolished. Who would want to travel from the constructive place towards this akhirah which is already destroyed. So let us ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we haven't destroyed this akhirah of ours. Salawat bheji Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. This is just to get to the point that where insan understands the reality of death. This is where insan is distinguished or distinctively compared with haywan or with other creations by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We see that what is the criteria for insaniyat? There are two, nazariyat, or there are two opinions when it comes to the existence of insan and the reality of insan. One is by monotheists, second is by materialists. Monotheistic view of this insan is that insan is compound of, this body and the soul. And there will be a hereafter. And insan's characteristics are due to the soul of insan. Whereas the materialist view says, no, there's just this body in this insan. Yet there are factions of humanity in this insan which comes due to the nature of insan, not from an outside thing which is known as the soul. So at least with these two opinions, they have one thing in common. They do distinguish between that part of humanity which has nothing to do with the materialism. But we see what is our distinction about this insan. The criteria for insaniyat of insan is to have the pain. And what is this pain? Inshallah, I'll take maybe another 3 or 4 minutes, 5 minutes at max to explain this, inshallah, towards Masajid. To have this pain, dard hona insan ke liye. किसी भी किस्म के दर्द का पाया जाना इंसान के अंदर. What is this pain that distinguishes or distinctively changes, or we're able to compare us with haywan and other beings? Because the angels don't have this pain. Haywanat have, or the animals have such pain, but not to that extent. That pain which we are describing over here is the pain for other beings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created. Because the characters of insan, or the humanity of insan, is not due to this physical body of his. You cannot say a person who has 2 eyes, 2 ears, 2 hands, 1 nose, all the good deeds are because of this physical aspect of his. Because if that was the case, what's the difference between this person who's walking around and the picture of this person who has 2 eyes, the 2 ears, or the nose and everything else? You can't distinguish between the picture and the real being. So therefore we understand that the reality of this humanity that exists in insan is not due to the physical aspect of it, rather it is due to the soul that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created for insan. And because of that soul, insan feels the pain. Dard hota hai insan ko. So is having this pain, is it a good thing? All our life we're trying to avoid pain. We're trying to cure the pain. We're trying to run away from the pain, lest any pain afflicts us. For example, if there's an internal or external wound on your hand, on your body, what do? You go ahead and try to fix it. But how is it then possible that this pain could be a good thing, or this pain would be the reality for the humanity of insan? Well, if you look at it from this end, that if it wasn't for this pain, yes, illness is bad, but the pain along with this illness is not bad. Because if it wasn't for this pain that is caused due to the internal or the external wound that you have suffered, you would not have cared about curing this pain. You would not have cared about curing this illness that you are afflicted with. In other words, a lot of illnesses these days, they start out without any symptoms. For example, cancer. What I know, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that it starts out with there are no symptoms, no apparent symptoms for insan. And then when it's diagnosed, unfortunately for some people, it is too late to cure it. So would you rather not have the knowledge and be prepared to cure this pain? This is why our 4th Imam says, "Oh Allah, when should I thank you? When you give me pain, or when I'm not healthy, or when I'm already healthy?" He says, I realize this favor of yours when I'm unhealthy, so that I can thank you for the time that you always kept me healthy. So this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is trying to tell us. اور یہ وہی پین ہے اور یہ وہی درد ہے. اس کی کئی مثالیں تھیں, وقت میں گنجائش نہیں ہے اس کو گزرتے ہوئے آگے لے کے جاؤں, مصائب کی طرف ربط دوں, کہ یہ وہی پین ہے, یہ وہی درد ہے جو امت مسلمہ کے اندر بھی ہوتا ہے. اسی لیے رسول اللہ یہ فرماتے ہیں کہ وہ شخص جو صبح اٹھے اور اپنے برادر دینی کے لیے درد نہ رکھے اپنے دل میں, وہ شخص اسلام سے خارج ہے. یعنی اگر اس کا برادر دینی کہیں سفر کر رہا ہے, کہیں کسی درد میں مبتلا ہے, اور یہ شخص من اصبح, اس کی صبح ہوتی ہے اور اس کو اس کی کوئی فکر نہیں ہے, یا من امسا, جس کی شام ہوتی ہے اس کو اس کی کوئی فکر نہیں ہے, تو بیسکلی یہ ایسا شخص ہے کہ جو اسلام کے دائرے سے خارج ہے. اس حد تک رسول اللہ فرماتے ہیں. اسی لیے آپ دیکھیے کہ کربلا میں بھی, اس زمانے میں بھی, جس شخص کو دین کا درد اٹھا وہ صرف اور صرف شخصیت امام حسین کی. اسی لیے امام حسین نے اس ارادے سے اپنا رخ کیا ہے کربلا کی جانب. امام کربلا کی طرف آتے ہیں, لیکن آپ یہ دیکھنا چاہتے ہیں کہ یہ درد صرف امام تو وقت, امام معصوم ہے, امام وقت ہے. آپ کہہ سکتے ہیں کہ امام کے اندر یہ درد پایا جاتا ہے, لیکن آپ کو اگر اس درد کی مثال دیکھنی ہوگی تو آپ دیکھ لیجیے کہ ایک ایک شخص جو امام کے ہمراہ ہے اس کے اندر اس درد کا جذبہ موجود ہے, دین کے اس درد کا جذبہ موجود ہے, تاکہ دین کی کسی نہ کسی طریقے سے نصرت کر کے دین کو کامیابی تک پہنچایا جا سکے. دین کو خطرہ لاحق ہے. اسی لیے امام کہتے ہیں زینب کی چادر چھن جائے تو مسئلہ نہیں ہے, ارے دین باقی رہ جائے, عباس کے شانے کٹ جائیں تو مسئلہ نہیں ہے, دین باقی رہ جائے, ارے علی اصغر کے گلیجے پہ برچھی چل جائے, تیر پھینکا جائے تو کوئی مسئلہ نہیں ہے, دین کو باقی رہنا ضروری ہے. میرا کڑیل جوان علی اکبر مجھ سے جدا ہو جائے اس کی فکر نہیں ہے, لیکن امام کو دین کی جو یہ درد موجود ہے امام کے اندر, اس کی وجہ کی ایک مثال آپ کے سامنے پیش کرتا چلوں اور آپ کی زحمت تمام ہے. امام تو معصوم ہیں, امام تو اپنی زندگی کے اس مرحلے میں ہیں کہ ہر شخص کو اس مرحلے میں اس طرح کے درد سے آگاہی حاصل ہو جاتی ہے. لیکن دیکھیے ایک 6 ماہ کا بچہ موجود ہے کربلا میں علی اصغر کے نام سے, کہ جس کے اندر بھی یہ آگاہی موجود ہے. کس طریقے سے علی اصغر نے نذرانہ عقیدت پیش کرنا چاہا. امام آتے ہیں خیمے میں, علی اصغر کو لیتے ہیں, کہاں لے جا رہے ہیں, کہا علی اصغر کو پانی پلا لاؤں, لے کے آتے ہیں مقتل میں, رکھ دیتے ہیں, کہتے ہیں ظالموں تمہارا اگر تمہیں مجھ سے کوئی بیر ہے تو اس بچے کا کیا قصور ہے, اس بچے کو پانی پلا دو, 3 دن کا بھوکا اور پیاسا ہے. بس یہ کہنا تھا, اس بجائے اس کے کہ پانی آتا, ادھر سے ایک سے شعبہ تیر آیا, علی اصغر کے پیوست ہو گیا. امام اسی حالت میں علی اصغر کو خیمے لاتے ہیں. کہتے ہیں کچھ روایات میں کہ چندی سکینہ بھاگی آئی, بابا علی اصغر زیادہ پیارا تھا, اس کو پانی پلا لائے. ارے سکینہ کی یاد نہ آئی. امام نے دامن ہٹایا ردا کا, امام نے دکھایا دیکھو بیٹا, ارے علی اصغر کو پانی میسر نہ ہوا, خون میں لطفا. لعنت اللہ القوم الظالمین وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون. بار اللہ ہمیں اس بات قبول فرما, ہم گناہ گار ہیں, ہمارے گناہوں سے درگزر فرما, ہمیں اہل بیت علیہ الصلوۃ والسلام کے نقش چلنے کی توفیق عطا فرما, ہمارے امام کے ظہور میں تعجیل فرما, ہمیں ان کے اعوان انصار میں شمار کر. ایک دفعہ سورہ فاتحہ کی تلاوت کر کے مرحوم مجتبا مرزا حسین مرزا کی روح کو ایصال کرتے ہیں. بسم اللہ الرحمن الرحیم.